What's up, guys? Welcome to Revisiting Westworld, our midweek edition of our Westworld Companion podcast presented by The Disorderly. This week, we're doing Season 2, Episode 2, entitled Reunion. So we'll start by kicking things off with a plot recap from the episode. Then we'll get into the bigger questions and theories and things like that. But starting with the recap, we open with Dolores looking out a window of a hotel room with Arnold. They're in the real world, presumably a city in China. It appears that this is before the park opens. Dolores is commenting on how beautiful the city looks, saying, quote, "Have you ever seen anything so full of splendor?" when Ford walks in and reminds Arnold that it's almost time for their big demonstration. Dolores is apparently their best robot, but Arnold says that she's not ready and they end up replacing her with Angela for the sales pitch to Delos. Ford takes Dolores on a walk through the city to his future home, which is still under construction. He talks about moving his family out to the city and he wants them, in arm's reach of Westworld, and how similar Dolores is to his son Charlie, namely that they see the whole world in a similar light with a sort of childlike wonder. Just as Arnold's being swept up by Dolores and her unique perception of the city and the things around her, she glitches and repeats the same exact phrasing as before, quote, "Have you ever seen anything so full of splendor?" This, on one hand, reminds Arnold that she is a robot and also an imperfect one at that, and understandably seems to disappoint him because he seems to think that she is special. He takes Dolores back to the hotel room, but not before promising her that he'll bring her back to the city sometime. The opening credits roll, and the next thing we see is the gala guest who Angela let go in the previous episode. He found an access point from which to escape the park, and he informs the security and lab techs at the gate that the hosts are rebelling. At that very moment, Dolores, Teddy, Angela, and the masked followers of Wyatt break down the door, having followed the gala guest, I assume, per plan. They disarm the security guard, and Dolores begins to show Teddy the truth about who he really is, which, of course, is a robot. Teddy does not handle this well at all. He threatens the lab techs who tell him that basically his whole existence is just for fun, which has got to be a tough thing to hear. But somewhere in the middle of all this, we cut to young Logan and William at a swanky bar as the piano version of Kanye's Runaway is playing in the background. William takes off, and Logan is approached by Angela and a guy named Akachita. They take Logan to a penthouse suite full of people, a disappointment for Logan, who thought this was going to be basically a private demonstration. Well, it turns out it is. Everyone else in the room ends up being a robot with a wag of Angela's finger. Everyone in the room freezes except for Logan and Angela. She basically says that the hosts are all there for him. Logan looks, by the way, almost frightened by the implication, but seems to get over it pretty fast. He ends up banging Angela and a few other hosts. And then Dolores is kind of like looking on like a real creep. And she's sort of met with a smug look by Angela. And that's sort of the last we see of this actual city in this timeline. Old William, aka the Man in Black, rescues Lawrence from a group of bandits and takes him to a saloon. He heals himself with a hidden emergency med kit that is stuck in the wall, even though that's cheating. But, hey, Ford changed the rules, so why can't he? The Man in Black and Lawrence have a philosophical conversation about finding the door and winning the game. He alludes to the fact that Westworld was built for the purpose of watching these park guests basically for the past 30 years and tallying up all their sins and choices. But that judgment wasn't the point. They had something else in mind entirely. We don't really get any clarity on what that something else is, but we do hear William's plan to ride out west. Lawrence warns William about the army of Confederados out west and suggests that they go through Pariah, Lawrence's old hometown, back when he played a host named El Lazo. Meanwhile, Dolores learns that 600 to 800 hosts are on their way to the rallying point to stop her. She orders the tech to wake up a Confederado and makes a vague statement about how the security guard doesn't know what he's really guarding, the real purpose of Westworld, but she knows the truth. Still didn't get a lot of clarity on, what that means, the implications of that. We get another flashback to 30 years ago in which Logan's father is skeptical about buying Westworld. This presumably takes place 2 years, I think, after the initial meeting with where Logan's having sex with all the hosts. So I think it's like 2 years later, but the dad is skeptical about buying Westworld. That is until young William convinces him that it's the perfect marketing tool, basically. So you can watch the guests act out their most deep-rooted desires, and that info can be used for a marketing advantage. So basically it says that it's invaluable to see what people really want when you give them complete freedom from judgment or being watched, even though they are being watched, and that seems to convince Mr. Delos. Back in modern times, Dolores and Maeve cross paths for the first time and have a little philosophical conversation. Dolores tells Maeve that she is basically obligated to help out with her cause, and Maeve calls Dolores out for commanding Teddy and everyone else, not exactly the freedom that Dolores is preaching, because she's basically enslaving the people around her. That's the only Maeve appearance for this episode, but she's still got Hector and Lee in tow, and presumably she's still going to find her daughter. Sticking with Dolores, she finally gets her army of Confederados by killing the inner circle and bringing them back to life. Hell of a trick to win them over. Next, we flash back to the retirement party of Logan's dad. Now, buckle up, because this actually seems to be another timeline. William has an 8-year-old daughter and is married to Logan's sister, whereas all the previous young Will appearances simply had William and Logan's sister dating, no kids. So keep that in mind. This is probably 8 to 10 years later. I don't really know. Based on the age of the daughter, I don't think it's ever said. It's just how she looks. Anyway, Logan is a wreck after what happened to him in season 1, doing some futuristic drugs in the backyard of said party and talking about the robotic apocalypse to Dolores, who was brought to the party to play the piano. She also repeats the same phrase from the beginning of the episode as she looks out on the city, quote, "Have you ever seen anything so full of splendor?" Back to the Man in Black now. He is close to getting his army from the new host playing El Lazo, or so he thinks. Turns out Ford personally programmed this new El Lazo to be part of the door game. He says, quote, "This game was meant for you, William, but you must play it alone. I'll see you in the valley beyond." Then everyone kills himself, and it looks like it's going to be just Will and Lawrence from here on out. We also find out that they're going to a place that William built, not Robert. But more on that later. We flash back one more time to a conversation between young William and Dolores in the lab. He says there's an answer in Westworld to a question that no one's ever dreamed on asking. He then says to Dolores, "Do you want to see?" and takes her to look at some non-specific but under construction kind of part of the park. He asks if she's ever seen anything so full of splendor. The fourth time that phrase has been muttered in this episode, twice by Dolores at the beginning, and once outside the dinner party with Logan, this time by William. Is there a connection there? Is he building a city? Is there some sort of... what is that trying to tell us? Who knows? Dolores arrives at the Confederado barracks to get the rest of her army. In a conversation with Teddy, she says that she knows what she'll find when she arrives at the Valley Beyond because an old friend was foolish enough to show her, and that the Valley Beyond, or Glory, or all these different names people have for it, it's not a place, it's a weapon that Dolores is going to use to destroy them. I'm assuming the old friend, by the way, is William, but who knows, I guess. It could be Arnold, an actual old friend, or sarcastically Ford, alluding back to the season 1 conversation where she says, "Are we very old friends?" And he's like, "I wouldn't say that, Dolores. I wouldn't say that at all." Could be that. Who knows? But that is the plot of Reunion, season 2, episode 2, in a nutshell. I know it was fast, but hopefully if you guys heard this, you already watched the episode. So just to get everyone on the same page, that's the plot. So now we can dive into some of the bigger questions. This is the sort of speculative part of the podcast, so if you don't like to hear that stuff, feel free to shut it off now. You got your recap. I explained as much as I could without they're not spoilers because they're theories, but if you don't like that kind of stuff, shut it off now. And yeah, you can still listen to the other stuff. I'll always separate that, so don't have any fear. Keep listening to this podcast. Tell your friends about it. But getting to sort of the big question, I think this is the big question. What do we think the Valley Beyond actually is? So it seems like William and Dolores are both on their way to it. William built it. Dolores says it's not a place, it's a weapon, and she plans on killing them all once she finds it. Similarly, William vouches to burn Westworld to the ground once he gets there. So it's kind of unclear whether Dolores and William are on the same side or opposite sides. It seems like whatever the Valley Beyond is, whether it's a metaphorical weapon, like a hub of information that people can use to ruin the integrity of the park or the guest or whatever. So it's a weapon in that sense. Or if it's an actual weapon, like a giant bomb. That's possible. Huge laser gun. We don't know what it is. But it seems like William and Dolores both have this idea that once they reach the Valley Beyond, they'll be able to destroy Westworld. So we should figure that out soon enough. They're clearly both converging to the same location. But the big question too, the little side question, the question within the question, I guess, the sort of skew in perspective. Is it really Dolores versus William, or is it Ford versus William using Dolores almost as a sort of proxy? Because it seems like there's a theory out there that obviously Dolores is conscious and she's acting on her own free will and doing all this stuff. Just how theatrical she's been. There's a lot of people talking about, it's kind of over the top. I actually noticed it in our very first instant reaction, our very first companion podcast. I think I said to keep an eye on it in the most recent companion podcast. It seems like that's a big thing. Almost like we're led to believe she's conscious, and then we find out that she's reacting to programming the entire time. If you guys remember, in season 1, Maeve was escaping Westworld, and she found out, and you thought, once again, she's being conscious, acting on her own free will. We find out that it was literally programmed into her to escape Westworld. It said, down to those sentences, she was saying everything. They're reading it. They're like, this is all predetermined. Somebody went in there and changed your coding, basically. So that happened with her. They already said that that's kind of like a possibility, giving us that hint. Now, Dolores could be doing the same thing. She could be responding back to her tight narrative loop, not improvising at all, literally just playing out Ford's plan, basically. She's Ford's puppet, basically. Beyond the grave, whatever. And then that would also sort of fit in with the phrase... You remember in episode 1, the young boy robot version of Ford? He was talking to William and saying, the game will find you. Isn't it possible that Dolores represents the door and she's literally looking for William? I feel like that's possible. He also says that the game begins where you end and ends where you begin. And finally, actually, there's the other little tidbit. He says that everything in the park is code. So that tells me two things. Starting with the first part, it seems like William built this place or weapon or whatever it is, because he said he did. It seems like that could be where he begins, right? Like he said, it's his creation, beginning. This could be what that refers to. And then as far as it beginning where he ends, I can see that meaning two things. It could be either, a symbolic ending, like the ending of his quest and the beginning of a new one, or it could literally be an ending, like Dolores kills William and that kicks off the new phase of the plan or the new phase of the rebellion or something like that. I'm sure we'll find out in good time, but I'm very interested with that. It seems like the meaning of that little riddle seems like it'll have some clarity as we arrive at the Valley Beyond, see what it actually is. Another little note, I was rewatching it with my roommate, episode 1, which, by the way, is the third time I've seen that episode now. And it could be a little, I'm sure that it was intentionally scripted in there, but it might not be significant. But when they're going to look at all the bodies that are in the water in episode 1, the guy was like, here, I think I found the host. They should be in the valley just beyond this cliff. The Valley Beyond. I don't know if that would make sense, that huge flood is this place that they're all heading to. Now, there's other theories with that too, but we'll get to that in a second. Just to touch one more time on the little riddle, the other part about everything in the park being code, I think that's another subtle reminder that Dolores is operating under programming. I really think that's the case. She's so theatrical, I think that's intentional. It seems overdramatic and almost like bad acting, but I think that's intentional because she's literally playing out Ford's narrative. She's not free. This rebellion was all handcrafted by Ford, and she's simply basically a glorified drone playing out his script. That's how I see all this going down. So I think there's little reminders of that. And then that parlays into who is the biggest liberator. Like it seems like all the focus is on Dolores, and Dolores is leading this army, and she's going to break out of Westworld and all this stuff. But isn't it possible that is almost a distraction so that Maeve, the real liberator, can find her daughter and get out into the real world and live amongst the humans? It seems like she already has more empathy, and I don't know if this is a spoiler, but I mean, it's not. It's in the weeks ahead, but if you don't watch that, okay, so if you don't watch those previews, then now shut this off. But in the weeks ahead section that we saw, post episode 1, we do see Maeve outside in the city, reaching her hand out, catching snow. It seems like at some point, now that could be 30 years ago, that could be present day, but it seems like at some point she was in the real world. So isn't it possible that all this chaos led by Dolores and really happening park-wide, isn't it possible that that's just a big commotion in order to allow Maeve to sneak around undetected? She alludes to this, actually. She even says, I think it was episode 1, season 2, episode 1. She says, did you do all this? And she's like, no, but I suppose that we share the same sentiments. Almost like I didn't plan all this, but I mean, I agree with them, and also pretty lucky. Like we're all kind of driving towards the same thing, and all this craziness really makes my escape a hell of a lot easier. How would she escape if this crazy rebellion wasn't happening at the exact same time? Isn't it possible that Ford sort of programmed all of this to line up, and this is all part of his plans, just different pieces on the chessboard? That's definitely an option. Now, the other side of things, too, is that Maeve was programmed by somebody else. That's been talked about. All we know, I think, is that we knew that she was actively being programmed to escape. We learned that in season 1. And I think all they said was somebody with really high security clearance is basically made all these changes to your core programming or something. Now, that could obviously be Ford. That could be, it doesn't make sense that'd be Bernard, but, it could be William. That could be Charlotte Hale, the chick from Delos. It could be Logan. We don't know. We haven't seen present day Logan. We've seen young Logan a bunch. We've seen Logan 10 years later at his dad's retirement party shooting up heroin or whatever he's shooting up, futuristic drugs in the backyard. We've seen that Logan. We haven't seen what happened to him. Did he die? Is he secretly pulling the strings and trying to get revenge on William? Has his opinion changed? When we saw Arnold and Ford years ago, decades back, disagreeing with each other, just like we saw William and Logan disagreeing with each other, is it possible that they've come to an understanding? They've come to think the same way because that happened with Ford, right? Ford disagreed with Arnold. And then we see at the end of season 1, he's basically saying, Arnold was right. I'm mad it took me this long to realize it, and I'm going to set his plan in motion. That's basically how that season ended. So it's possible that Logan's not even working against William. Maybe he's working with him. Maybe he's dead. We don't know. We don't know what's going on with him, but somebody's controlling Maeve, and I feel like she's kind of the person to focus on. I almost think that Dolores is a red herring to distract us, to throw people off the scent, and then one of the twists is going to be, wow, as everybody, the security team, everybody is all this craziness. Like even in this episode, to have Maeve appear for like 2 seconds, I feel like it's trying to like throw us off the scent. Like Dolores is the main character, follow Dolores, and then all of a sudden Maeve is the one that actually makes these profound sort of strides of walking through, quote unquote, the door and getting into Westworld and actually starting this new race of people, if you want to call them that, the robots, getting them in the real world, but doing it successfully. Dolores has this anger in her. How is that ever going to work? She's never going to be able to overthrow the civilian government. But Maeve, it seems like if she blends in, that's the better approach. And that's kind of what's going on right now. Dolores is leading herself towards battle, and Maeve is kind of sneaking around, and she's going to get her daughter and break out, I think. That's what I think is going to happen. It just seems like she's more in control of her actions. So that's definitely something that I think is extremely intriguing, and I actually think it's going to be big moving forward. One little small question, I don't know, but I feel like whenever I see people who are wearing masks or anything TV show, like you see someone about to get killed and then it cuts away, that person's almost always alive. Why wouldn't they just show you that person getting killed? Same thing with masks. I mean, I guess they're intimidating, but why not just have a bunch of random bandit-looking like cronies following Dolores and Teddy and Angela around? Why not just have that be the situation? But instead, they have these masks on. Is there any significance to that? Are the masked men? Do you think it's somebody who matters? Do you think it's I don't know, somebody whose appearance would give them away, like Logan, or I don't know, like someone trying to blend in, or if you think they're robots, maybe it's the Ghost Nation, and they are somehow tied into all this. I feel like there's a reason why they are masked, right? Couldn't it be possible that Dolores is being followed by the Ghost Nation or assisted by them? Maybe she has something to do with Stubbs. As you know, Stubbs he got attacked by the Ghost Nation. We haven't heard since. I think that's interesting. I would actually almost venture to guess that the Ghost Nation is the people who are masked, but we'll see. I don't think I've heard that anywhere either. I've been listening to podcasts. I don't think I've heard that theory anywhere, so that's a Nick Risner original. I don't know how much significance it has, but that's what I'm thinking. And then one more, not correction or omission or anything, but last week I thought I had this profound theory that what they were doing with the data and the DNA was basically tracking the guest experience or whatever, getting little pieces of them so they can make perfect clone replicas, and then putting those robots, say Donald Trump comes to Westworld, and you could figure out a way to make an exact clone replica of Donald Trump. And then all of a sudden it's like, all right, well, let's get the real Donald Trump, let's hide him away somewhere, take him out, and then replace him with a robot. And all of a sudden, Delos controls the president of the United States. And that applies to anybody, right? You can put it in any sort of cultural or world leader or anything. That was my big theory. What I was not aware of is that is basically the plot to the sequel of the movie Westworld called Future World. I didn't even know there was a movie called Future World. So that whole clone theory of creating robot versions and putting them in these positions of power, that apparently was thought of how old is that movie? 70s? That's thought of 30, 40 years ago. So whoops. And actually, now that I know it exists, that's completely flip-flopped my opinion. I think that's another red herring. I think the show, so many people were debating these big twists and trying to figure out, the big sort of plot turns and all this stuff in the show, that I think the writers are intentionally trying to throw people off the scent. I think they even said as much during the fan Q&A, the panel discussion. I forget what that was for. Comic-Con, maybe? I don't know. But it seems like they're trying to do that. So to have this little thing, just a little line about DNA, I'm sure they're blackmailing guests or doing something like that. It's not a complete throwaway. But the little part about DNA would get a lot of people on Reddit to be like, oh, you know what? It's just like Future World. They're probably doing clones. They're probably putting robots in there, which I just did the same thing, not realizing Future World was a movie. But now I think that's a diversion. I think they're trying to get you to look at their left hand while the real trick's going on with the right hand. I think that's what's going on with the. I don't think they're just copying the plot of Future World, because Westworld season 1 was very different than the movie Westworld. I guess I've never seen it, but I've heard it's very different. So I doubt season 2 would just be an exact replica of the Future World plot. Right? It seems like it's. I think that's thrown in there. So people who are aware of Future World would pick up on that and be like, and just run with that theory, even though it's a false theory. I think that's what's going on there. But that'll do it for, I think, the discussion for this week's episode. Obviously, we'll be back every Sunday night. So this Sunday, Westworld Season 2, Episode 3. Is there a title yet? I don't know. There is. Oh, so there's a title. Let's title for the next two. Should I jump ahead? I don't know if it matters. This is Virtue e Fortuna. Pardon the pronunciation. It translates from Italian into English as it sounds, as virtue and fortune, and it's part of Machiavelli's formula for success. So it's basically, virtue, skills, abilities, things like that, mixed with fortune, good timing, good luck, things like that. It's those two things coming together leads to success. So it seems like that could apply to a million things. That could apply to William's quest. That could apply to Dolores' quest. That could apply to Maeve's quest. Who knows? It seems like, who knows? But it seems like someone might succeed in this next episode. So that's what it's called. We'll have your Westworld Companion podcast for that coming out Sunday immediately following the episode. If you subscribe to this podcast on iTunes and Stitcher, you'll get it first. It'll be on YouTube the next day at some point. And I hope you guys are liking these. I hope they're catching on because I like doing them. And obviously, if you have any questions, feel free to ask. My DMs are open. You can reach out anytime. It's Nick Risner on Twitter, NickRizner. You can find The Disorderly on Twitter at Disorderly Media. You can find us on Facebook at Disorderly ENT, I believe. Just search it in the bar, you'll find it. TheDisorderly.com is where you can find all the best in sports and entertainment. And that'll do it for this episode. I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope you tell a friend about this. Rate, review, subscribe, thumbs up on YouTube. And we'll see you Sunday night. Peace, guys.